That was the part nobody stopped to ask about. They did not ask because they did not need to. The announcement had come from the front of the church, from the mouth of a man they trusted, and that was enough. In Harlan County, enough was usually all anyone required. She had been sitting in her usual spot that Sunday morning, third pew from the back on the left side, her coat folded neatly across her lap, because the heater on that side of the building always ran a little warm once the room filled up. She had her small Bible open to no particular page. She did that sometimes, just let it fall open, not really reading, just holding it the way you hold something familiar when the world feels like it might shift without warning. The visiting choir had finished. The pastor, a younger man named Gerald Price, who had only been at First Grace Community Church for 2 years, had stepped back from the podium. And then Warren Aldis had walked forward. Warren Aldis was the kind of man a town like Harlan builds its identity around. He was 61 years old, broad across the shoulders in the way of men who had worked physical jobs in their younger years and never quite lost the frame of it. He had served as a county judge for 19 years. He had served as chairman of the church's deacon board for 11, and he owned a large property on the east side of town, a house that sat back from the road behind 2 big oak trees, and he was known for keeping it immaculate. He was not the kind of man people questioned out loud. He stepped to the podium without being introduced, which was itself a statement. Gerald Price did not stop him. Nobody stopped Warren Aldis. He spoke for less than 2 minutes. He said there had been a matter of conduct that the deacon board had reviewed. He said it was not something he would discuss in detail out of respect for the privacy of those involved. He said that it had been determined, after careful consideration, that a member of the congregation had engaged in behavior that was not consistent with the values of First Grace Community Church. He said the board had made the difficult but necessary decision to ask that member to refrain from attending services until the matter had been properly resolved. He did not say Clara's name. He did not have to. He looked at her for just a moment, a brief and steady look that carried the weight of everything he was not saying, and then he looked back out at the congregation, as though the matter were already closed. Clara felt the air in the room change. She had felt that kind of change before, years ago, in a different place, under different circumstances. It was the feeling of a door shutting, quiet and firm, in a room where you thought you had a right to stand. She closed her Bible. She folded her coat over her arm. She stood up, and she walked out. Nobody said anything as she left. A few people turned to watch her go. A woman named Donna Farley, who sat 2 rows ahead and had once brought Clara a casserole when Clara had a bad cold, looked at the floor. An older man, named Harold Pruitt, who always greeted Clara by name when she came in each Sunday, kept his eyes straight forward. Clara did not cry until she was in her car with the door closed. She sat there for a moment with her hands in her lap, and she let herself feel it, all of it. The shame and the confusion and the raw edge of something that had no clean name. Then she started the car and drove home. She lived in a rented house on Cutter Street, a small place with a good front porch, and a yard that she kept tidy. She had lived there for 6 years. She had painted the front door herself, a dark green that she had chosen carefully from a paint chip collection at the hardware store on a Tuesday afternoon when she had felt unusually hopeful about things. She still liked the color. She liked it now, parking in front of it, looking at it before she got out of the car. She was 44 years old. She had come to Harlan County after a marriage that had ended badly. Not violently, but in the slow, grinding way that some marriages end, wearing everything down to nothing over years until one day you realize you have both been living like polite strangers in the same house, and there is nothing left to save. She had not taken money from that marriage. She had taken her clothes, her books, a cast-iron skillet that had belonged to her mother, and the understanding that she was going to have to build something entirely from scratch. She had done that. It had taken time, and it had not been easy, and there had been nights in those early years in Harlan when she had wondered if she had chosen the right place to land, but she had built it. She had a cleaning business, 7 regular clients, a reputation for being thorough and honest, and a small but steady life that she had made with her own hands. One of those clients was Warren Aldis. She had cleaned his house every other Friday for the past 3 years. She knew the layout of his home the way you know the layout of any place you have been in often enough for it to stop feeling foreign. She knew which closet door stuck, and which window let in a draft in cold weather, and which countertop scratched easily and needed to be wiped with a particular kind of cloth. She knew where he kept his files. She had not been looking for anything in those files. She had been cleaning the shelf above his desk one Friday afternoon, moving things carefully to dust underneath them, when a folder had slipped and papers had scattered across the floor. She had bent to pick them up, stacking them without reading them, and then one page had caught her eye before she could stop it. A name she recognized, a number that seemed too large for the context, a date that corresponded to something she had heard mentioned in town. She had put the papers back in the folder, and the folder back on the shelf, and finished cleaning, and gone home, and not said a word about it to anyone. That was 8 months ago. She had gone on cleaning his house for 3 months after that, each visit a small exercise in keeping her face neutral and her hands busy. Then Warren Aldous had called her, very politely, and told her that he would be using a different cleaning service going forward. He thanked her for her years of good work. He did not give a reason. He did not need to. She had not argued. She had lost the income from that job, which had been one of her better-paying accounts, and she had quietly picked up a new client on the other side of town to replace it. She had told herself that it was over, that nothing was going to come of any of it, that she had not seen what she thought she had seen, or that even if she had, it was not her business. She had almost believed that. Then came that Sunday morning in church. She sat on her porch that afternoon, after she had gotten home, with a cup of tea she had made more out of habit than any real desire for it. The street was quiet. A neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the block. The sky had that pale gray quality it got in late October, flat and close, like a ceiling that had dropped a little overnight. She tried to think clearly. She had not done anything to any person in that church. She had not taken anything, said anything harmful, or acted in a way that deserved what had happened to her that morning. She knew that, but knowing it and being able to prove it were two entirely different things. And in Harlan County, Warren Aldous's word was not just an opinion. It was close to a fact, the way certain things become facts, through sheer repetition, and the authority of the person saying them. She thought about the papers she had seen on his desk. She thought about the name on that page, and the number, and the date. She thought about what it might mean, if what she suspected was actually true. She thought about what it had already cost her just to be sitting on this porch with a cup of tea she did not want, on a Sunday afternoon, locked out of the only community she had built here. She did not know yet what she was going to do, but she knew she was not going to leave town. That was the first decision. She made it quietly, sitting there in the thin October light, and it did not feel heroic. It felt simply like the only thing she had left that was entirely hers, her presence, her refusal to disappear. She finished the tea, she went inside. She made dinner, something simple, and ate it at her kitchen table, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. And in the morning, she got up and went to work. She had 3 clients that week. She cleaned their houses with the same care she always brought to it. Nobody mentioned what had happened at church, but she noticed, in the particular way that people who have been made invisible learn to notice things, that the conversations were a little shorter. The eye contact was a little less direct. One client, a woman named Patricia Vance who lived on the hill road north of town, made a point of straightening things before Clara arrived, as though she were preparing the house for someone she was no longer entirely comfortable having there. Clara noticed it all. She said nothing. She went home each evening and sat on her porch, or read at her kitchen table, or walked the 2 blocks to the small grocery store on the corner to buy whatever she needed for the next day. She went on living in Harlan County exactly as she had before, with the difference that she could feel the town looking at her now in a way it had not before, assessing her, measuring the space between her and the judgment that had come down from the front of the church. She was not a weak woman. She had not become one. But she was tired. She had been tired for a while, in the deep way that has nothing to do with sleep, the kind of tired that comes from spending years being careful, being quiet, being smaller than you actually are, because the space available to you keeps shrinking, without anyone ever announcing that it is shrinking. She had come to Harlan to build something, she had built it, and now something was trying to take it apart, piece by piece, quietly and without ever stating directly what it was doing. On a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks after the Sunday at church, her phone rang. She did not recognize the number. She almost did not answer it. The voice on the other end was a man's, low, unhurried, carrying the particular cadence of someone who spent most of his time outdoors and did not feel the need to fill silence with words. He said his name was Dale Whitmore. He said he had heard what happened at First Grace. He said he thought she might want to know that she was not the only person in the county who had a reason to be concerned about Warren Aldis. He said he was not calling to get involved in her business. He was calling because he thought it was possible their situations were connected, and because he believed that connected situations sometimes called for connected responses. He asked if she would be willing to meet. She held the phone for a moment, looking at the green front door from inside, visible through the small window beside the entrance. She said yes. The morning after Clara said yes to that phone call, she woke up earlier than usual. Not because she had set an alarm, but because her mind was already running before the light came through the curtains. That was how she had always been when something important was happening, her body refusing to stay still, even while the rest of her tried to hold on to sleep a little longer. She made coffee, stood at the kitchen window looking out at the yard, and thought about what she knew of Dale Whitmore. She did not know much. His name came up occasionally in the way that names of men with large landholdings came up in a county like Harlan, naturally, and without fanfare, the way people mention a mountain that has always been there. He owned the Whitmore Ranch, which ran along the western edge of the county, and had been in his family for 3 generations. He was not a social man by reputation. He was not unfriendly, but he was not the kind of person who showed up at town events or made a point of being seen. People respected him the way they respect something solid and self-sufficient. They did not know him the way they knew each other. She had cleaned for his mother once, 2 years back, a brief arrangement that had ended when the older woman moved to a care facility in another town. Dale had paid Clara promptly and thanked her without too many words. She had not spoken to him since. She did not know why he had called her. She drove to the diner on the edge of town where they had agreed to meet, a small place called Bowers that served breakfast all day and was usually quiet on weekday mornings after 9. She arrived a few minutes early and sat facing the door. He came in at exactly the time he had said he would. He was taller than she remembered, lean in the way of men who work hard in all weather. He wore a plain gray jacket and a hat he took off when he came through the door. He spotted her immediately, came directly to the table, and sat down without ceremony. He ordered coffee. She already had hers. He said, "I appreciate you coming." She said, "Tell me why you called." He told her. It took time, and he told it in a straightforward way that she appreciated, without trying to soften things or arrange them in a way that favored him. 2 years earlier, he had been approached by a man who worked for a county contractor about a road maintenance contract that was set to be renewed. The man had told Dale, indirectly but clearly enough, that the contract renewal would go more smoothly if Dale made a contribution to a particular private account. Dale had asked who the account belonged to. The man had not answered directly, but he had made it clear enough that the account was connected to Judge Warren Aldis. Dale had refused. The contract had not directly affected his ranch, but he had suppliers who used the county roads, and he had been planning to bid on a related project. After his refusal, his bid had been disqualified on a technical ground that Dale's attorney had described as, at best, a stretch. He had not pursued it formally. He had, instead, started paying attention. Over the following months, he had watched. He had spoken quietly to several other landowners and business owners in the county. He had found a pattern. Not everyone had experienced the same thing, but enough had encountered similar situations, indirect requests for payments framed as donations or gifts, followed by either smooth passage through county processes or sudden unexpected obstacles, depending on whether the payment had been made. The pattern was consistent enough that it could not be explained by coincidence. He had been building a record of it. He told her this quietly, his coffee untouched and going cold. Clara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she did not speak right away. She looked out the window at the parking lot and the flat gray sky beyond it, and then she looked back at him. She said, "What do you need from me?" He said he did not need anything from her. He wanted her to know what was happening. because what had been done to her at that church was connected to this, and she deserved to understand why. He also told her, and he said this carefully, that he had contacted a state ethics investigator 9 weeks prior. Not a local official. A state-level investigator, someone outside Harlan County, and outside the reach of anyone in it. The investigator had been interested. The case was not closed. It was, in fact, moving. Clara absorbed this. She felt something loosen slightly in her chest. Not relief exactly. More like the first sign that a locked thing might be capable of opening. She thought about the folder on the shelf in Warren Aldis's office. She thought about the name and the number and the date. She told him. She described what she had seen as precisely as she could. The name on the page, the figure, the date. She told him she had not gone looking for it. She told him she had not told anyone. She told him she had been afraid. She said that last part flatly, without apology, because it was the truth and she was too tired for anything other than the truth. Dale did not look at her with pity. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when something he has suspected is confirmed. He said the name she remembered matched a name that had appeared in 2 of the documented transactions he had already collected. He said the date aligned with a period he had already been looking at closely. He said that what she had seen, combined with what he had gathered, would likely be enough to move the investigation into a formal stage. He asked if she would be willing to speak to the investigator directly. She thought about it. Sitting in that diner booth with her coffee, which had also gone cold, looking at this man who had not called her out of sympathy or charity, but because the facts of their situations fit together in a way that was useful and honest. She said yes. In the days that followed that meeting, the town continued doing what it had been doing to her, quietly and without mercy. Her phone rang less. Her client list shrank further. A woman named Donna Farley, the same woman who had looked at the floor the day Clara walked out of church, called to cancel her regular Thursday appointment. She said she was going to do her own cleaning for a while to save money. Clara thanked her and hung up. She knew it was not about money. Her landlord, a man named George Sutter, who was a deacon at First Grace, and had always been perfectly civil in the way of people who expect to be thanked for their basic decency, sent her a notice that her rent would be increasing by $40 a month, starting in 2 months. No explanation, just the notice, typed, slipped under her door one evening. She put it on her kitchen table and looked at it for a while. She had enough money. Not comfortably enough, but enough. She had always been careful with it, the way people who have had to start over from nothing learn to be careful, keeping a small reserve that she added to a little each month, and did not touch unless she absolutely had to. The rent increase would cut into that, but it would not break her. What bothered her was not the money, it was the precision of it. The way each thing that happened to her was just small enough to deny but just large enough to sting. This was not a town turning against her in a moment of passion. This was something measured. Each piece placed carefully, so that no single piece looked like cruelty, but all of them together added up to an instruction. Leave. She did not leave. She went to the post office every morning. She went to the hardware store when she needed something. She walked down Main Street to the grocery store in the early evenings the same way she always had. She said good morning to people who barely returned it, and good evening to people who found reasons to look away. And she held her back straight the whole time. Not out of pride exactly, but because the alternative was to shrink, and she had already decided she was done with shrinking. She met with the state ethics investigator on a Thursday afternoon, in a town 30 miles from Harlan, a small, neutral location that had been suggested for exactly the reason that it was 30 miles from Harlan. The investigator was a woman named Patricia Gale, careful and methodical, who asked Clara questions in a quiet, unhurried way and took notes without commenting on what she was hearing. Clara told her everything she had told Dale. She told it the same way, clearly and without exaggeration, and she did not try to make it larger than it was. A folder that had fallen, a page she had not meant to read, a name and a number and a date that had lodged themselves in her memory because some part of her had known, even then, that they mattered. Patricia Gale thanked her. She told Clara that she could not share the details of the investigation with her, but that her account was helpful and would be treated as a confidential statement. She asked Clara to contact her directly if anything else came to her attention, or if anything happened that she felt was connected to what she had described. Clara drove home alone through 30 miles of flat county road in the late afternoon light, and she felt, for the first time in weeks, like something larger than herself was moving. Like the ground was still, and she was still, and somewhere beneath all of it, something was shifting in a direction that pointed away from Warren Aldous, and toward something she did not yet have a name for but recognized as the possibility of fairness. She parked on Cutter Street. She looked at her green front door. She went inside and made dinner, and ate it quietly, and went to bed. 2 days later, she got a call from a client she had not heard from in several weeks, a retired teacher named Edna Walsh, who lived on the south side of town, asking if Clara could start coming again. Edna said she had been meaning to call for a while. She did not explain why she had stopped. Clara said she could start the following Monday. It was not much. It was one phone call and one client, but it was the first one. And Clara had learned, in the years since her marriage had ended, and she had driven to Harlan County with a cast-iron skillet and not much else, that the first one was always the hardest. Dale Whitmore had not said anything at the time of the church incident because he had learned something important about the particular kind of wrong that Warren Aldous had been doing for years. It was not the kind of wrong you could stop by getting loud about it too early. He had grown up watching his father run the ranch, and his grandfather before his father, and one of the things that had been passed down through those years, along with the land itself and the knowledge of how to work it, was a simple understanding about the difference between justice and noise. Noise was easy. Noise felt good in the moment. You went and said your piece and people nodded and nothing changed, because the man at the center of the problem was still the man at the center, and all you had done was let him know you were watching. Justice was slower. Justice required patience that felt, in the middle of it, almost identical to cowardice. You had to sit with that. You had to let people think you did not care, or that you were afraid, or that you had simply decided it was not your problem. You had to hold the thing you knew quietly and carefully until the moment arrived when it would mean something instead of just making noise. Dale had been holding it for almost 2 years. He was 53 years old, divorced, no children. He ran the ranch with 2 full-time hands and a network of seasonal workers he had known for years. He was not a complicated man in most ways. He liked the work of the ranch, the straightforward logic of it, the way the land told you what it needed and rewarded you for listening. He was comfortable with silence. He had chosen a life that had a lot of it. He had also chosen, long ago, to be a man who did not look away when something wrong was happening close enough for him to see it. The first sign of Warren Aldous had come from a neighbor, a wheat farmer named Owen Briggs who ran a modest operation on the north edge of the county. Owen was not a complainer by nature, so when he mentioned to Dale, during a conversation at a farm supply store, that his permit renewal had been delayed 3 times in a row for reasons that kept changing, Dale had listened more carefully than he might have otherwise. Owen did not mention the judge by name. He said there had been a suggestion made to him about a way to speed the process along, and he had not liked the sound of it, and he had not done it, and his permit was still not renewed. Dale had filed that away. Over the following months, he had heard variations of the same story from enough different people that a shape had emerged from what had seemed at first like scattered complaints. A road contract bid disqualified on a technicality, a zoning variance delayed without explanation, a business license renewal tied up in a review that went on twice as long as it should have. In each case, somewhere in the background, there had been some kind of contact, some indirect message passed through an intermediary, suggesting that a problem might resolve itself more quickly if a certain kind of contribution was made. Nobody wanted to say it plainly. Nobody wanted to be the one whose name ended up on a complaint in a system that Warren Aldous still had a significant amount of influence over. Dale understood that. He had experienced it himself. His own encounter had come after he declined to make the contribution that the intermediary had suggested. Nothing dramatic had happened, but a bid on a county road maintenance contract that ran alongside a portion of his ranch's access road had been rejected in a way that did not stand up to scrutiny if you looked at it carefully. Dale had looked at it carefully. He had shown it to his attorney, a thorough woman named Carolyn Marsh, who had been practicing in the state capitol for 20 years and did not have the habit of minimizing what she saw. Carolyn had said, carefully, that there appeared to be a pattern worth documenting. Dale had started documenting. He had kept a log. Names, dates, amounts where he had them, descriptions of conversations reported to him by others. He had not approached anyone officially within the county because he had understood, very early on, that the county's official channels ran through or alongside Warren Aldis in ways that made them unreliable for this purpose. He had needed someone outside, someone with authority that did not depend on the county's ecosystem. He had found Patricia Gale. She was a state-level investigator with the Ethics Division, and she had been professional and thorough from the first phone call. She had asked good questions. She had not made promises. She had explained the process clearly. This would take time, and it required building a case from documentation rather than testimony alone. And there was no guarantee of where it would end up. But the information Dale was presenting was serious enough to pursue. He had agreed to those terms. That had been 9 weeks before the Sunday at church. When word reached him about what Aldis had done to Clara Madsen, Dale had felt something tighten in him. Not surprise. He had already suspected that the judge's removal of Clara from his cleaning schedule was connected to something she might have seen or known. Men like Aldis did not end arrangements without reason. But the church, that had been something else. Using the church, using his position as deacon board chairman to publicly strip a woman of her place in the only community she belonged to, without charges, without evidence, without giving her any way to defend herself. That was not just corruption. That was cruelty, arranged to look like authority. Dale had made the phone call to Clara that evening. He had not done it out of sympathy, though he felt that too. He had done it because what she had seen in that folder was potentially the one piece that would make what Patricia Gale had already collected fully coherent. A specific name, a specific figure, a specific date. Something concrete in the chain of events that the investigation needed. After Clara's meeting with Patricia Gale, the investigation had moved into a more formal stage. Dale knew this not because Patricia had told him directly, but because the quality of her questions had changed when she spoke to him again. They had become more precise. She was filling in specific gaps rather than mapping general territory. He continued his normal life during this period. He got up early. He worked the ranch. He kept his meetings with Patricia Gale, which happened by phone or in the same neutral town 30 miles from Harlan. Because the less Harlan County knew about any of this, until the moment it was ready to be known, the better. He watched what was happening to Clara from a careful distance. He heard about the rent increase. He heard about the clients who had dropped her. He heard about the way people treated her when she came to the post office or the hardware store or the grocery store. He heard about it through the particular network that exists in any small county. The farmers and ranchers and longtime residents who talk to each other honestly, in ways they do not talk in town. He did not like what he heard. He also understood that there was nothing he could do about it yet that would not compromise the timing of everything that was being built. If he spoke out too early, Aldis would know that Dale was behind the investigation. The judge had enough influence to create delays, to pressure people into silence, to make it significantly harder for Patricia Gale to take the next steps. Timing was not cruelty. Timing was the difference between noise and justice. He held the patience. There was one evening in November, about 6 weeks before the Sunday he would choose to walk into that church, when Dale drove past Clara's house on Cutter Street for no particular reason, or at least not a reason he examined too closely. He saw the green front door. He saw lights on inside, visible through the window. She was home. She was there. He drove on. He thought about her, after that, in the way you think about someone who has been put in the middle of something through no choice of their own, someone who has been handed consequences without being given the crime. He had been the one to reach out to her. He had been the one to bring her into the formal part of this process. He felt the weight of that. He reminded himself why he had called her. Not just because of what she had seen in that folder, because she had a right to understand what was being done to her and why. Because she had been sitting alone on that porch, in the middle of something she could not fully name, and she had deserved to know the shape of it. Still, he held the weight. In December, Patricia Gale called with an update. The documentation was nearly sufficient. There were 2 more pieces she needed, both of which were in the process of being verified through channels she had described to Dale as independent of the county. She believed they would have what they needed within 4 to 6 weeks. She mentioned, carefully, that the timing of any formal disclosure would benefit from being chosen thoughtfully. These things were always better when they could not be managed quietly, when they happened in contexts that were difficult to contain. Dale understood what she was not saying. He began to think about context. He did not think about it for long. He already knew the answer. He had known it, perhaps, since the morning he had heard what had happened to Clara in that church. There was only one place in Harlan County where Warren Aldis held both kinds of power, legal and communal. Only one place where a public accounting would land with the full weight of both. Only one place that would be difficult, afterward, for anyone to pretend they had not witnessed. Dale was not a church regular. He showed up at Easter and funerals. He began to think about what Sunday morning he would choose, and whether there was a way to make sure the room was fuller than usual. In early January, he heard that a well-known visiting pastor from the regional diocese was scheduled to lead the service at First Grace Community Church on the second Sunday of February. Visiting preachers always drew extra attendance. People who did not come regularly would show up. Several of the county's more prominent families would be there because of the occasion. Dale noted the date. He contacted Carolyn Marsh and Patricia Gale separately to let them know the documentation should be finalized before that date. Both confirmed it would be. He spent the following weeks preparing what he was going to bring into that church. Not a speech, not an argument, but a folder. A careful, organized folder of documentation, names and dates and figures, copies of payment records, written accounts from 5 individuals who had agreed to have their experiences included, and a summary prepared by Carolyn Marsh that laid out the pattern in plain language. He also, in those weeks, continued to say nothing public about any of it. He paid his property taxes. He attended a county road commission meeting that he always attended because it affected his ranch's access routes. He ran into Warren Aldis once, at the hardware store in late January, and the judge had nodded at him, and Dale had nodded back. And that had been the whole of it. He held the patience. He thought sometimes about Clara walking past the post office, past the hardware store, past the grocery store, holding her back straight in a town that had been quietly instructed to make her feel small. He thought about the green front door and the lights inside. He let himself feel the weight of what he was asking her, in a sense, to continue to endure while he waited. He held it. The second Sunday of February arrived cold and clear. The kind of morning that makes the air feel sharp and precise in a way that seems to carry meaning even when it does not. Dale put on his plain gray jacket. He put the folder under his arm. He drove to First Grace Community Church. He was not on the program. He parked and went in and stood at the back. He did not sit. He watched the service proceed, the readings, the choir, the visiting pastor's sermon, which was about the nature of accountability in communities. Dale thought, standing there in the back with the folder under his arm, that the universe occasionally had a sense of timing that was almost too precise to be accidental. When the service reached the moment for open remarks, Dale walked forward. The congregation at First Grace Community Church on that particular February Sunday was the largest it had been in more than a year. People had come because of the visiting pastor, a man from the regional diocese with a reputation for powerful speaking. They had come because February in Harlan County is long and gray, and a full church on a Sunday morning is one of the things that makes it bearable. They had come because word had gotten around, as it always did in a county that size, that the morning would be worth attending. They had not expected Dale Whitmore. He walked from the back of the church to the front in a silence that he did not fill. His footsteps were the only sound in the room as he crossed from the last row to the open space before the pulpit. And the sound of them was deliberate, unhurried, the footsteps of a man who had decided something and was not reconsidering it. He stood before the congregation. He did not introduce himself. Everyone in that room knew who he was. He looked out at the pews, taking a slow moment before he said anything, and the room held itself in the particular stillness of a place where people are not sure what they are about to witness, but can feel that it matters. Then he began. He said he was there because a wrong had been done in that building, and because wrongs done in buildings that are supposed to stand for something better than ordinary human failure deserve to be addressed in those same buildings, in front of the same people who were present when the wrong occurred. He said that 3 months ago, A woman named Clara Madsen had been asked to leave this congregation on the authority of the deacon board chairman, who had told the room that she had engaged in conduct unbecoming the values of this church. He paused. He said that was not true. He said Clara Madsen had been asked to leave this church because she had cleaned Warren Aldis's house, and she had seen things during that work that Warren Aldis did not want seen, and removing her from this congregation was a way of making her smaller, quieter, easier to manage, and harder to believe if she ever chose to speak. He said the real reason Warren Aldis had wanted her quiet was that he had been running a corruption scheme through the county's administrative and contracting systems for a minimum of 7 years. The room did not make a sound. Dale continued. He named the scheme plainly. He described how it worked, the indirect requests communicated through intermediaries, the contributions framed as donations or neighborly gestures, the consequences for those who refused, the smooth passage for those who complied. He named the categories of contracts and permits and variances that had been involved. He did not use vague language. He did not say alleged or apparent or possible. He spoke in the direct, declarative sentences of a man presenting facts rather than making accusations. He named 3 men in the congregation by first and last name. He said that these men had made payments that could be documented, that the documentation existed, and that it had been provided to a state ethics investigator. All 3 of those men were present that morning. Dale did not look at them specially when he named them. He spoke their names the same way he spoke every other fact in the room, plainly, as things that were simply true. He described Clara's role with precision and care. He said she had not come to him with information. He had sought her out after recognizing that what she might have seen in Aldis's home could be connected to what he was already documenting. He said she had told him what she witnessed without exaggeration, and without any desire for it to be more than it was. He said she had been afraid of exactly what had already happened to her, and that her fear had been completely reasonable, given what this community had done to her in the weeks following that Sunday. He spoke that last sentence without anger, and the absence of anger in it made it land harder than anger would have. He said, "She cleaned this man's house honestly for 3 years. She saw something she did not go looking for. She told no one, because she had already seen what this town was capable of doing to a person who posed a problem for the wrong man. And when he was finished with her, he walked into this building and used his position here to make sure she felt it as publicly as possible." He reached into the folder under his arm and removed it. He placed it on the deacon's table at the front of the church, which stood to the left of the pulpit, the same table where the collection plates were kept, the same table where the church's announcements were organized each week. He said the folder contained documentation of 7 years of the scheme, 5 written accounts from affected individuals, and a legal summary prepared by a licensed attorney. He said copies had already been provided to the State Ethics Division. Then he stopped. He looked out at the room for 1 moment longer, and then he walked back up the aisle and sat down in Clara's pew, third from the back, left side. The room did not recover from its silence immediately. It held the silence the way a space holds the shape of something that has just been in it. Warren Aldis was in the 4th row from the front. He had been there for the entire service, in the spot he always occupied, the deacon board chairman's customary seat. He did not stand. He did not speak. He sat with his hands folded on his knees, and his face had the particular quality of a man whose most private architecture has just been walked through by someone else. Gerald Price, the pastor, stood at the pulpit with the expression of a man who had just watched the weather change from inside a glass house. He asked quietly if the congregation wished to close the service in prayer. Several people said yes. Several said nothing. The visiting pastor from the diocese sat in the chair beside the pulpit and did not move. The service closed in prayer. People filed out slowly, in the way people leave a room after something has happened that cannot be taken back. There was conversation in the parking lot, voices low, people standing in small clusters with their coats buttoned against the February cold, not quite ready to go back to their ordinary Sunday afternoons. Dale sat in the pew until the room had mostly cleared. He did not speak to anyone on his way out. He got in his truck and drove home. The folder sat on the deacon's table. Nobody moved it. By the end of that week, Warren Aldis had resigned from the deacon board. The resignation came in the form of a brief typed letter delivered to Gerald Price on a Tuesday evening. It cited health reasons. It thanked the board for years of collaboration. It said nothing about the Sunday before it, or the folder on the table, or the man who had placed it there. Gerald Price read the letter, and then sat in his office for a long time without moving. The State Ethics Board sent formal notice within 10 days that a full investigation had been opened into the conduct of Warren Aldis in his capacity as county judge. The notice was not public immediately, but in a county the size of Harlan, it was not private for long. Of the 3 men Dale had named publicly in the church, 2 settled matters quietly through attorneys before any formal charges were filed. Neither of them called Dale. They moved through the process with the particular efficiency of people who want something over quickly and are willing to pay for that speed. The third man, a building contractor named Leonard Potts, contested the findings initially through a lawyer. He would later stop contesting them. Warren Aldis himself made no public statement. His attorney made one on his behalf, a short and careful document that said the judge intended to cooperate with the investigation and had every confidence in the process. It was the statement of a man who had run the process long enough to know its language and use it even when the process was running against him. The judicial conduct hearing was scheduled for the following spring. The county reacted to all of this in the way that counties react to the public exposure of something they have known about privately for years, with a rapid and collective revision of memory. People who had quietly accommodated the system began to remember it as having seemed wrong to them at the time. People who had treated Clara badly began to reframe their behavior as confusion or misunderstanding. A general sense spread through the town that the real story had never been about condemning Clara, but about trusting the wrong man, and that trusting the wrong man was nobody's particular fault, but rather a shared misfortune. Clara watched this revision from her porch on Cutter Street. She understood it. She did not find it comforting. The week after the Sunday at church, her phone had rung 3 times with calls from people she knew. 2 of them were former clients asking if she had availability. One was a woman from the church, a person Clara did not know well, who said she wanted to apologize. She did not try to make it larger than it was. Donna Farley called on a Thursday afternoon. She said she had been thinking about things and she wanted to restart her cleaning appointments if Clara still had time. She did not say "I'm sorry." She said she had been thinking about things. Clara said she would add Donna back to her schedule starting the following week. She hung up and sat for a moment at her kitchen table and let herself feel the complicated, unresolved shape of being offered back what should never have been taken. Her landlord, George Sutter, did not rescind the rent increase. The notice had said 2 months, and 2 months passed, and the higher amount began appearing on her statements without comment. She paid it. She added a small note to her monthly budget and continued building her reserve. She had briefly considered calling him about it. Then she decided that some things were not worth the energy, and that the accuracy of her judgment about which things those were was one of the things she had learned from the past several months. The state ethics investigation continued through the spring, moving with the careful pace of formal processes. Patricia Gale called Clara twice during this period with brief, professional updates and occasional follow-up questions. Clara answered them clearly each time, and thanked Patricia for the call, and went back to her day. She had a full client list again by April. 8 clients now, 1 more than before all of this had started. The new client was a couple who had moved to Harlan from out of state, and had heard about her through a contact of Edna Walsh. They did not know the story of the church. They had hired her because Edna had said she was thorough and honest, and that was enough for them. Clara found that she liked working for people who knew nothing about any of it. She went back to First Grace Community Church on the first Sunday in March. She had thought about it for a while. She was not sure she wanted to return to a building that had been used the way it had been used, to a community that had sat in its pews and watched without objecting. She was not sure the institution deserved her presence, but she also thought about what a place of worship was for, and whether letting a man's misuse of it define her relationship to it was a way of letting him take one more thing from her that was hers. She decided it was. She dressed the same way she always dressed on Sunday mornings. She put on her coat, she drove to the church, and she walked through the door and went directly to the 3rd pew from the back on the left side and sat down. The service had already begun. A few people turned to look at her. Gerald Price, at the pulpit, paused for just a fraction of a second when he saw her, and then continued with what he was saying. He did not acknowledge her presence out loud. At the end of the service, he came down from the pulpit and walked toward where she was gathering her coat. He stopped beside her pew. He said simply, "I'm glad you came back, Clara." He said it quietly, not for the room to hear. She looked at him for a moment. He was a young pastor in a complicated situation that he had not created and had not handled well, and he knew both of those things. She said, "Thank you, Gerald." She walked out into the March morning. Dale Whitmore was not at that service. He was not at the next one. He appeared at an Easter service several weeks later, standing near the back in his plain jacket, and Clara saw him when she turned during the recessional hymn. He was looking at the hymn book, not at her. She turned back forward. She thought, walking out into the spring air, that what he had done was not a simple thing to classify. He had helped her, clearly. He had also used her, in a sense, or at least used the fact of her and what had been done to her, as part of a sequence that had ultimately served his own purposes as well as hers. He was not a bad man. He was a careful man who had chosen a right action for a combination of right and practical reasons. She thought that was probably how most right actions worked, and that holding them to a standard of pure motivation was a way of finding reasons not to be grateful. She was grateful. She did not make any great production of it. The judicial conduct hearing for Warren Aldous was held that spring in a county courthouse 2 hours from Harlan. Clara was not required to testify. The documentation had been sufficient. The hearing lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, a panel of 3 members of the State Judicial Conduct Commission issued a finding of serious misconduct. Warren Aldous was removed from the bench. The Harlan County Courier ran the story on the front page. There was a photograph of the courthouse, not of Aldous. The article was careful and well-sourced, and noted that the investigation had been initiated following concerns raised by private citizens. Clara read it at her kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with her coffee. She read it through once, then set it down. She looked at the window above the kitchen sink, which faced the yard, which was showing the first green of spring, small and tentative but present, the way things that have been under the ground for months push up through the surface without drama, just because it is time. She washed her coffee cup. She got her bag. She had a client at 9. She had been asked once, by the woman who had called to apologize after the church Sunday, whether she was angry at the town, at the people who had pulled away from her, at Warren Aldous, at all of it. She had thought about how to answer that. She had said that she had been angry, and that the anger had been reasonable and she had not been ashamed of it, but that she had also found, in the months of walking through this town while it looked away from her, something that had more use than anger, a kind of clarity, a precise understanding of what this place was and was not, what she could expect from it, and what she could not, what she had built here, and what she had only imagined was built. What she had built was still here, the green door, the morning routine, the 8 clients, the reserve in her account that she added to each month, and did not touch unless she had to. What she had imagined was a community that would look at her with the same basic decency she offered it. That had turned out to be more conditional than she had understood. She had spent a few months mourning that. Then she had stopped. She had, in a careful and private way, started to build something more accurate in its place. Not harder, not smaller, just more clear-eyed. She knew which people in this town stood for something when it was easy, and which ones stood for something when it was not. She knew the difference now in a way that she had not known it before. And that knowledge, uncomfortable as it had been to acquire, was hers now completely. It did not cancel out what had happened to her. It also did not require that what had happened to her cancel out the life she intended to keep living. She drove to her 9 o'clock client. She parked in front of the house. She got her supplies from the back seat. She went in and did her work. She was thorough and honest. She was good at this. The morning was plain and clean and entirely her own.